It started with a broken glass, a shatter in the night, sharp, sudden, slicing through the silence like a scream no one heard. Lila stood frozen in the hallway, barefoot, staring at the remnants of the wine glass on the kitchen floor. Her uncle stood over it, breathing heavily, his back turned to her. "You shouldn't be up," he said, not turning around. That night, something in her shifted, but no one noticed. Not yet. 3 weeks earlier, the Miller house had felt safe, warm. Her mother, Ruth, kept the windows open and sunlight poured in like honey. Lila, 13, shy, smart, and soft-spoken, spent her weekends in the attic painting birds and reading fantasy books about girls who slay dragons. Then Uncle Ray moved in, recently divorced, out of a job, needing a fresh start, he said. Her mother, ever the generous older sister, offered him the guest room. Just for a while. Ray brought gifts. Fancy notebooks for Lila's sketches, candies from the gas station, jokes that made her mom laugh. He was funny, helpful, always around, too around. It started subtly, a hand on her shoulder that lingered too long, a whisper too close to her ear. Lila couldn't explain it, just a chill that coiled up her spine every time he entered the room. One evening, as she painted in the attic, she heard footsteps on the stairs. No one ever came up there. "Hey, kiddo," Ray's voice echoed. "Thought I'd see what you're working on." He smiled, too wide. Lila smiled back, stiffly. "Just birds." "You've got talent," he said, stepping inside. "Your mom ever tell you that?" She nodded. He stood too close. Her heart thudded. That's when the bird painting, vibrant, half-finished, toppled off the easel and hit the floor. A wing cracked. A smudge bloomed red where the beak had been. Ray laughed, but Lila didn't. Something about the way he picked it up, so gently, then looked at her. It didn't feel like kindness. The tension built like a storm cloud. Lila grew quieter. She avoided the attic. Her bedroom door stayed locked. She flinched at loud voices. Ruth chalked it up to teenage moods. But Lila's sketchbooks told a different story. Page after page of birds in cages, birds with clipped wings. A single page of a girl with no face, crying red tears. Then came the night of the broken glass. Ray had been drinking. Ruth was working the night shift. Lila, curled on the couch, pretending to read, heard footsteps behind her, too slow. Measured. Then the crash. A wine glass on the tile floor. She turned to look, and his eyes locked with hers. Cold. Hungry. Wrong. "You shouldn't be up," he said again, this time with a slur. She didn't respond, just backed away. Quiet. Careful. Upstairs, behind her locked door, she pressed her ear to the wood, listening. He didn't follow, but he didn't leave either. And she knew. Something was coming. What no one knew, not even Lila, was that someone else had noticed. Someone had seen the change. Someone had read her sketchbook, and that someone had already made a call. Lila stopped speaking in full sentences. Her teachers noticed first. Answers that used to flow with quiet confidence were now reduced to nods, shrugs, and soft, "I don't know"s. Her eyes rarely met theirs. Her sketchbooks, once bursting with color and detail, turned to shades of gray. Black wings. Barred windows. Rain. Always rain. At home, she was even quieter. Uncle Ray was everywhere, hovering in the kitchen, watching TV when she came downstairs, asking questions she didn't want to answer. "You're quiet these days, kiddo," he'd say with that same too-smooth voice. "Everything all right?" She'd nod. Every time. Because what else could she do? Her mother was exhausted. Long shifts at the hospital left her drained, her face lined with worry about bills and hours, and the man in the guest room who was trying to get back on his feet. "You could show your uncle a little kindness, Lila," she'd said once, not unkindly. "He's been through a lot." So had Lila, but no one asked about that. The real shift came the day of the science fair. Lila didn't show up. It was the first time she'd ever missed a school event. Her best friend, Jada, waited with a poster board they had worked on together, confused and anxious. She texted. Called. Nothing. Lila showed up the next day with shadows under her eyes and a bruise half hidden under her sleeve. "Lila," Jada whispered at lunch. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Lila said too quickly, then added, "I'm just tired." Jada didn't believe her. That afternoon, Jada slipped into the art room after school. She knew where Lila hid her sketchbooks, bottom shelf, behind the paper scraps. She flipped one open. The drawings were different now. A girl in a dark hallway, a man in the doorway, a hand reaching out, tears, cages, screams with no sound. Jada shut the book quickly, heart racing. That night, she didn't sleep. The next morning, she did what Lila was too afraid to do. She told someone. The call went into Ms. Monroe, the school counselor. It was protocol, mandatory, serious. Lila was called into the office just before lunch. She sat stiffly in the soft blue chair, eyes down, fingers twisting the sleeve of her hoodie. She knew something was different this time. Ms. Monroe's voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "Lila," she said gently, "someone's worried about you, and I want to ask, are you safe at home?" Lila didn't answer. Not at first. Then, almost imperceptibly, she shook her head, and the silence shattered. By the end of the day, Child Protective Services had been contacted. Her mother was called. Ray wasn't home, and Lila, for the first time, spoke. Softly, brokenly, but clearly. And the truth, dark and terrible, began to uncoil in the light. They didn't let her go home. After the interview with the counselor, after the tears, and the trembling words, and the silence that finally broke, Lila sat in the nurse's office wrapped in a soft blanket, watching the clock tick like it might explode. She asked just one thing. "Is my mom mad at me?" No one answered her right away. Ruth Miller was halfway through her shift when she got the call. At first, the words didn't register. "Your daughter disclosed some disturbing information. She made a statement regarding your brother. Mandatory removal. Temporary protective custody." Ruth dropped her coffee. The paper cup burst on the floor like a gunshot. This can't be right," she whispered, her voice hollow. "Ray. No, Ray would never. He's her uncle." But denial didn't change facts. And Lila's quiet, choked confession, given behind a closed door with a trained interviewer and a recorded line, was clear. It had been happening for weeks. Little touches, inappropriate comments, a hand brushing across her thigh while she painted. One night, he tried to enter her room. One night, he almost. She didn't want to say the rest. She didn't have to. Ray was arrested that evening. The officers arrived before sunset, pulling up just as he stepped out of the corner store with a bag of beer and a smirk. It fell from his face the moment he saw the uniforms. He didn't resist, just looked at them and muttered, "I knew this was coming." They put him in the back seat. Lila, watching from inside a social worker's car a block away, said nothing, but her hands trembled in her lap. The house turned cold without him, but not empty. Detectives arrived the next day, walking through the rooms like ghosts with notebooks. They took photos, gathered clothing. One of them found her sketchbook, the one Jada had seen, and nodded grimly. "Kids tell stories through art," he said to the other. "Most people don't know how loud silence can be." The town reacted like small towns do, with whispers. Some people were shocked. Some weren't. Ray had always been charming. Friendly. Too friendly, maybe. But no one wanted to see it. Now they did. And still, some didn't believe it. "He's her uncle," one neighbor said. "Family wouldn't do that." But family did. Lila was moved into a temporary foster home, a quiet house with a kind older couple who made herbal tea and didn't ask too many questions. She missed her mother, missed her room, but she didn't miss the house. Not really. Not anymore. She began therapy. The therapist was patient, gentle, asked questions with no pressure. Lila didn't speak for the first 2 sessions, but the third time she whispered, "He said no one would believe me." And the therapist looked her in the eyes and said, "They already do." Meanwhile, the DA built a case. Multiple counts. Endangering a minor. Sexual assault. Predatory behavior. The sketches were entered as evidence. The statement from her counselor. The bruises. The timeline. The community watched. And Lila, fragile but standing, prepared to do something no child should ever have to do. Face him in court. The courthouse smelled like old wood and nerves. Lila sat outside the courtroom in a stiff-backed chair, wearing her best dress, light blue, the one her mom used to say made her look like the sky. Her knees bounced uncontrollably, hands clenched in her lap. She didn't want to see him. She was about to. The trial of Raymond Elias Carter made local headlines for weeks. The respectable uncle, the charming man, the one who helped coach Little League 2 years ago. It was unthinkable, the papers said. It didn't match the man they thought they knew. But what the town saw now wasn't a coach or an uncle. It was a man in handcuffs, sitting behind a polished defense table, his hair trimmed, his face tired, his eyes dull. And across from him was Lila. The prosecution called her to the stand on the third day. The room went still when she walked in. Her steps were small, uncertain, but her face, though pale, was resolute. She took the oath, sat down. The microphone looked too big for her. The prosecutor, a woman in her 40s with steady eyes, approached gently. "Lila," she began, voice soft but firm. "Can you tell us, in your own words, what happened in your home?" Lila looked down. The room held its breath. Then she spoke. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried. She told them about the attic, the hallway, the wine glass, the touches, the things he said, the things he did. How scared she was. How no one listened, until someone did. At one point, the judge called for a short recess. Lila had started to shake, tears falling silently. She didn't want to leave the stand. "I need to finish," she said. When the judge nodded, she took a breath and kept going. And when she finished, you could hear a pin drop. Then came the defense. A man in a slick gray suit stood up and smiled too much. He called her miss. He called her confused. "Lila," he said, flipping through pages. "You're a creative young girl, yes? You draw, write stories." She nodded once. "Do you think it's possible," he said slowly, "that some of what you're describing might have been imagined?" The room tensed. Ruth, sitting in the front row, gripped the edge of her seat. Jada's mother reached for her daughter's hand. Lila looked straight at him. "No," she said clearly. "It happened." And for the first time in weeks, she didn't shake. The trial lasted 5 days. 5 long, blistering days where secrets turned into statements. Drawings became evidence, and the community watched the truth rise, piece by painful piece. Then came the verdict. It was quiet when the jury came in. Lila sat between her therapist and her mother, who now looked at her daughter like someone she finally saw. On all charges, the foreman read, "Guilty." Ray didn't say a word as they led him away. He didn't look at Lila, not once, but she looked at him, not with fear, with fire. Outside the courthouse, reporters hovered. Cameras flashed. But Lila didn't speak to them. Instead, she turned to Jada, who had waited every day, who had believed her from the beginning. "I think I'm ready to draw something new," Lila said softly. Jada smiled. "Wings this time." Lila nodded. "Yeah, wings." Lila's world had always been small, but now it was bigger, wider, full of space she hadn't known existed before. The trial was over. The case closed. Ray was sentenced to prison, but his shadow didn't leave immediately. It lingered in the corners of her mind, in her dreams, and sometimes in the way her mother looked at her, like she wanted to hold Lila in her arms, but didn't know how. They moved. It was easier that way, Ruth said. A new house in a new town, somewhere they could breathe without hearing whispers through the walls. The first few weeks were hard. Lila didn't want to leave her room. She avoided mirrors, but her mother, despite her own grief, became a quiet force. Ruth signed Lila up for art therapy and group counseling, where other girls shared their stories, some spoken, some unspoken. And slowly, Lila began to draw again. But this time, there were no cages, no rain, no broken wings. This time, her sketches were full of light. Months later, the school in the new town held a young artist showcase. Lila's drawings hung on the walls, bold and bright, with birds flying free. No bars to keep them from soaring. At the opening, Lila stood by her pieces, not hiding, but not speaking much either. She watched the people who came to look, and one by one, their eyes softened. They understood something. They didn't ask questions. They just looked, and that was enough. Ruth stood next to her, proud but quiet. "You're going to be okay," she whispered. "I promise you." Lila nodded, her smile small but real. "I know." Some nights, when she was alone, Lila still felt the ghost of Ray's voice, like a dark thread in the back of her mind. But now, she had learned how to weave it into something different, something stronger. She still drew birds, but the wings were always wide now, always open, always ready to fly. And for the first time in a long time, Lila didn't feel so small anymore.